Jesus gave us the Great Commission to go and make disciples of all nations. We partner together to obey his command. That means that we are co-missioned, called to work together to share the gospel and reach the nations for the name of Jesus. Welcome to the Co-Missioned Podcast, a ministry of the West Metro Baptist Association, a network of churches located on the west side of Atlanta, Georgia. Each episode features conversations with pastors and ministry partners as we discuss the importance of working together intentionally for kingdom mission, both local and global.
My name is Jason Loudermilk, and I'm honored to serve as the Association Mission Strategist for the West Metro Baptist Association, as well as the host for the Co-Mission Podcast. And today, our featured guest is Will Heath. Will serves as the founder of Sherpa, a ministry focused on succession planning and transitions for churches and ministry organizations. So, Will, thank you so much for being here today and being willing to have this conversation with us. So before we get into our discussion, I wanted just to let our listeners and viewers know a little bit more about you and about Sherpa. So tell us, as we get started, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you came into this ministry.
Yeah. So 2007, I was doing bivocational ministry. My background as a commercial lender and investment banking. Mm-hmm. And so being bivocational, I didn't have a lot of time to go to associational stuff or hang out with other pastors, but there was a pastor in a neighboring community that just kind of took me under his wing, and we would go to lunch every once in a while together. So I just read John Maxwell's 21 Laws of Leadership. Have you ever read that book? Yeah, a long time ago.
Yeah.
The 21st law is the law of legacy. Mm-hmm. So Steve was 63. I was 31 at the time. We'll do the math. You can figure out how old I am. And so I read it and I called him. I was like, Steve, have you read this? He hadn't. I said, if I buy it for you, will you read it? He said, yes. So I bring it to him and we're just connecting. And I said, hey, I got two questions for you. Number one, what will it look like for you to be a pastor when you're no longer the pastor? And number two was my version of kind of pared down version of Ecclesiastes chapter 2. It's like, hey, what are you guys doing today to keep your eventual successor from really jacking things up? Mm-hmm. And I had no idea what I was asking. To me, the law of legacy was a concept for something down in the, it's like this idea that I could easily sit over here and talk about that has no impact on me.
Right.
I had no idea. And remember, was it the Beverly Hillbillies when, and up come the ground, come above them, right? When he sticks the shovel in. Yeah. Are we going to edit that out, by the way? But I just hit a vein in his soul. And for the next 2 hours, a guy that I deeply, deeply love and respect and admire, through tears, talked about how afraid he was of an eventual transition. And man, like that just is one of those moments where I finally leave. I'm walking out to my car and I feel like God tapped me on the shoulder and said, hey, Will, I want you to help Steve. By the way, there's a lot of Steves out there. And so that really put me in this arc of thinking about succession. Actually, over the next year, I read the Bible through thinking like exclusively through the lens of transitions and leadership transitions and succession ideas. Professionally, what I did in banking at the time, bank that I was at, I was the bank's liaison to the nonprofit community. It's one of the roles that I served. And our annual budget was $2 million to give away for philanthropy issues. And so like from the time that I had that lunch with Steve to 12 months from that moment, I did over 200 site visits with area nonprofits and just interviewing them, talking them through that. Succession became a really important filter for me. I saw dozens and dozens of transitions in various phases of effectiveness, failure, preparation, responding to all of that. Took a lot of notes. And man, that's really where this started. And I mean, like really, like my first book, Embracing Succession, my acknowledgement dedicated to Steve. And it's like, that's the guy God used to help me think and really put this on my radar. At the same time, as a younger guy, I would read a lot of leadership stuff. And in the leadership culture at that time, a lot of it was mining wisdom from older guys or up and coming, really uber successful pastors and ministry leaders. You go put them on a stage, right? But what I noticed was a massive absence in this conversation about how do we come alongside older leaders and help them understand how to leave in a good way. And man, it just stuck with me, and it's become this drumbeat in my soul. I mean, next year, this is when we're doing this podcast. It's January of 2027 will be 20 years that this has been a topic on my radar. Wow. And that's the backstory.
So as we kind of get into this conversation, I think it's probably going to be helpful for us to define succession and transition. We're in particular talking about leadership transition within the local church.
Yep.
So talk a little bit about how you would define succession planning, maybe is the way to ask that.
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's interesting you use succession and transition. Like we at Sherpa, we do transition management and we do succession planning. Those are two of the 5 core services we offer. And how we bifurcate the two is transition management is when we get into a non-leadership transition. Okay. And so if we have, if we're consulting with a church on wanting to change service times, right. It's one thing to say we want to change service times. It's another to actually architect a plan to implement a new service time, right? Yeah. Succession planning specifically, or it's specifically for a key leadership transition. Most of the time it is a legacy leader and it is an end of career type of transition.
Okay.
Yeah. So I would say kind of the big aha for me early on is that search and succession are not the same thing.
Okay.
And search,
meaning that there is a distinct difference between just searching for the next leader and actually planning for that succession.
Yeah, exactly. And so what we would say is that the search is a part of a more holistic succession process.
Okay.
And we've identified what we call 6 succession planning conversations. And our thesis is we're not stewarding a season of transition unless we've accounted for all 6 of those conversations, right? So the first one is, I'll present them in the form of a question, is how do we protect organizational continuity? So how does a leader in a leadership team, whether it's a local church, small church, big church, parachurch ministry, how do we keep the transition itself from becoming the thing that disrupts the mission? Right. So what does that look like? Right. It's how do you actually architect the plan in a way to minimize disruption? And by God's grace, most of the ministries, whether again, parachurch ministry, nonprofit, or local church, most of them actually grow during seasons of transition. And when I tell people that, they're like, what? Like, yeah, most of our ministries actually grow. It's not because we're just so good at it. I mean, we're pretty good at what we do, but it really is resourcing those leaders and those teams that are just experts in their culture, and they start the conversations early enough to prepare for the transition. And what ends up happening is it becomes an ignition switch in a lot of cases. So protecting organizational continuity would be one. Transition strategy management is another one. So how do you manage the nuts and bolts of the transition? Like what actually goes into effectively navigating a season of leadership transition, a succession plan? We talk about process pathways and we talk about signposts. There's 5 essential signposts. Won't get into the details of that right now, but one of those 5 signposts is the search conversation, which is important, but it's not the only thing.
Right.
The third one is, so we've talked about how we can minimize disruption. We've talked about how we're going to manage the plan. Well, the next obvious, what that creates another problem and an opportunity is how do we communicate it? Like how do we communicate in a way that inspires confidence in the process, but also continued investment into the mission? I was on the phone yesterday, coaching call with a pastor. It's a crazy story. Will not tell you the name of the church, but it was a merger of 2 churches. It was a predominantly Anglo church and a predominantly Korean church merged together, merging 2 cultures. Beautiful story. The merger's gone very well, but the reason why the Anglo pastor wanted to do the merger was so that he could transition and hand it over to
the Korean pastor.
The Korean pastor. The problem is At no point in the merger conversation did he tell his congregation that that was the motivation.
Oh, so this is like springing it on them at the last minute.
So now, well, the merger happened about 1.5 years ago. The transition's going into effect this summer.
Wow.
And I'm like, little bait and switch here. And so I was talking to the pastor, like the whole communication thing. They're wanting to stand up at the end of January, just in a couple weeks, and tell the congregation the plan. I'm like, that's really quick. Like, I mean, how many volunteers you have, like key leaders? How many staff you got? You're going to talk to your staff before then? Well, we're just going to talk about it on stage.
So everybody finds out at the same time?
At the same time.
Oh, wow.
But you would be surprised how many ministries will go and announce significant updates like that. And they tell everybody at the same time. And then they wonder why people get frustrated or they don't know how to buy in. So it's not just the information you give, it's how you communicate in a way that leads people through a season of transition. And how you do that really does matter. So how do we protect organizational continuity? Number one. Number two, what goes into the nuts and bolts of managing the succession plan? Number two. Number three is how do we communicate in a way that inspires continued investment, right? How do we communicate effectively? Number four is, we'll finally get to it. How do we go find the next person? Right? It's that new leader hiring conversation. It's one of the 5 signposts, but it is such an important piece. It's not the only piece, but it is an important piece. And so how do you do that in a way? The search industry is available, but not every ministry can hire a search firm. They're expensive. Like search firms cost more than we do. Right. And we work with churches for a lot longer period of time. Right. So it's kind of frustrating to me, by the way. But it's how do you do that? And then, what happens if pastor gets hit by a bus? What's the contingency plans? I mean, if a church doesn't have that in place, and not just for the senior leader, but for key leaders throughout the organization. And then finally, the reason I got into this in the first place was my conversation with Steve. I call it proactive exit planning. So how do we come alongside leaders and help them imagine a future where the pulpit is not their domain? Like so many leaders, it's different in the for-profit space, in nonprofit space. Nonprofit leaders are doing the thing that they want to do. They're passionate about. In the for-profit space, I talk with leaders all the time. It's like, hey, I get to finally retire so I can get to go do what I want to do. Right. Ministry leaders have been doing what they want to do for a long time. And so how do we help them from a financial standpoint, come alongside them in a tangible, practical way to financially prepare? But then that's only part of the equation. It's like, what are they going to do on the other side of transition?
Sure.
Like, what's their next season of
influence? When you give
like?
up the thing that you've been passionate about.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's a great question.
Yeah. So succession, one of my little power liners is succession isn't the last great thing a leader does. It's their gateway to their greatest season of influence. So when leaders navigate succession well, it actually maximizes opportunity on the other side, because when they're doing ministry, their focus primarily is a singular organization. But when they transition well, because it's such a rare thing in our context, on the other side of transition, all my clients get phone calls. Hey, can you tell me how you did that?
Right.
Hey, I'm a business owner in the community. I know we never talked, but I saw you do that. I'm coming up with a transition. Can you talk to me about that? Local, I've had several churches in college towns. The presidents of the universities called them. Hey, this is kind of on the DL, but I'm thinking about mine. Eventual at a university system, calling pastors saying, can we have a conversation? Other pastors, other network, other people, other churches in the denomination. It's just has this way of expanding influence that a lot of pastors, because we don't understand that succession and search aren't the same thing. So we think it's the search. So pastors get afraid of the conversation, so they step away from it.
Right.
And they think they fall in this lame duck fallacy. And they don't know how to engage the conversation. They want to. I've never met a leader that doesn't want to. They just don't know how.
Because honestly, if you think about it, what ends up happening then is that they're holding on to this major decision they're about to make, keeping it a secret from everyone in their circle until they spring it on the congregation. And then the congregation is left scrambling, trying to figure out how to fill the pulpit, when to get an interim, when to do the search process.
That's right.
And
that's right.
Just some planning ahead of time would take care of a lot of that shock value.
A lot of that. And, the thing driving that whole lame duck fallacy, leaders will think, well, if I say something, then, oh my gosh, I'll be put out to pasture or whatever. I don't know of another context where a leader who is the first to really be able to name a transition, an inflection point that nobody else sees it, knows it's going to happen, has an idea of when it's going to happen, and then stares it down and walks away and doesn't do anything about it. There's not another place in the world of leadership in any sector where that is excused. But pastors will excuse themselves and they'll move forward in fear. Like, man, faith is a forward-facing muscle. And then our pastors, again, I think I've never met a pastor who wants their transition to destroy the ministry.
Right.
That person does not exist, or they're really sick and they need counseling. Okay. Right. They just don't know how. They get paralyzed in fear because we don't have good language around this. But what I have found is when we teach people those 6 succession conversations, now all of a sudden they have hooks on which to hang conversations they want to have, but they just don't know how to engage it.
Right. On a personal level, we watched this. My father-in-law was a pastor and had sort of made the decision that by the time he reached 75, he was going to be ready to retire. And so as he was pastoring, and I don't know how they came up with the plan, it may have just been the Lord opening the right doors at the right time, but at least he was having the conversation. Yeah. And God brought a young man into their church family, raised him up into an associate pastor role, and then eventually they were able to hand off leadership to this new pastor. The church voted him in, and the transition happened from one week to the next. It was like a handoff, and it was one of the most beautiful things. And the church is thriving now under this new leadership, and it's been a really beautiful thing to watch. We were back up there where they served up in the mountains. We went over fall break and actually went and visited the church, and it was just incredible to watch the people responding to their new pastor, who they already had a great relationship with as he was already serving in the church. And I know every transition can look different. It doesn't have to be one particular way, but that just really solidified for me the need for our churches to be able to be thinking about and talking about these things.
Yeah. Well, and even, the topic of this podcast, a big theme is partnership and cooperation. Yeah. I would say that's actually the theme of what Sherpa does with all the resources. And we partner. It really is a partnership with the ministries we work with. We don't, as an outsider, what we say is we provide process. Our clients provide content. So we're not telling churches and ministries and nonprofits what to do.
It's not like you have a process and if you do this, and this, but you're working with them to.
That's right. Yeah. What the process is for us is for each one of those 6 conversations, we actually facilitate processes, but our processes are questions.
Right.
It's like, hey, here's a question. Let's talk about it openly and honestly. Let's get our opinions and make a decision. And we can give you perspective. We can benchmark your thinking against people we've worked with on 5 continents around the world, but it's your decision. Like, we get on a plane, we go home, you have to live with the consequence of your decision. So we're not going to make it for you. Right. You have to make it.
Well, and that's so important because every single church is different. It's a living organism that has it has its own culture and its own way of doing things. And it's really difficult to try to cookie cutter an approach of putting in, what someone else's ideas about what needs to happen. You just can't do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But being able to help guide them through those conversations is huge.
It is huge. And sometimes even there's been several cases where I'm working with a local church, but we also, I asked them, like, what's your relationship like with your local association? So that's really good, blah, blah, blah. A lot of reasons for that. And I said, hey, maybe we should invite your local associational person into some of these meetings so that we can get their local experience and benchmark and go this process with us. Some of my churches take me up on that. Most don't, but it's even like, I think of succession planning. I don't think anybody's an expert in the topic of succession planning. It's just such a broad and varied, there's so much nuance to it. There are principles that are consistent, but the application and implementation of those are varied. what I see is a season of succession is the convergence of a bunch of different disciplines. What Sherpa's contribution into this conversation is just to give ministries buckets to contain those conversations. So we have conversation A here, we have conversation B next, then we have conversation C, and then we invite the experts in to help fill those out. Sometimes it's denomination associational leaders, sometimes it's other consultants, sometimes it's in-house counsel, not lawyer counsel necessarily, but just in-house expertise that they can tap on the shoulder and say, hey, can you help us with this? And it's just a bunch of people coming together to steward a pretty significant moment or season in the ministry, in the life of ministry.
One of the areas we've kind of really focused on in the past year or so as a local association is the search process. For the longest time, one of the things I discovered, for the longest time, I would go and like meet with the search team once they were put together and do their training. And then sort of leave them to their work, giving you your tools, now go do the work. And what I have discovered is a lot of times there was so much time between when the initial training happened and when you got to the end of the search process that there were multiple ways to go off the rails. Yeah. And so we've revamped our search team process to be less of a training and more of a consulting where I'm walking alongside them throughout the whole process. And so it's been great because we've helped avoid some of those kind of things. But I think as you've been talking, just thinking about like all of the time that comes before the search team is put together in terms of thinking about transition and succession. So a question I would have then would be, let's say that there's a pastor who is considering retirement at some point in the next year, 2 years. How far out from sort of the actual coming to close of his pastoral ministry at the church, how far out should he be having these conversations about succession?
When you say conversations, I want to parse that a little bit.
Okay.
So there's conversation where we're like intentionally planning, and then there's conversation where we're publicly acknowledging.
Okay.
Right. Let me start with the first one, or the second one, the publicly acknowledging. I say as soon as you get within 5 years of your anticipated transition, open season to acknowledge. I'm
getting older. My retirement will be here at some point.
Yeah, don't know when. I'm not telling you when I'm retiring. Just saying, hey, man, just like a lot of you, I'm getting old, and it's as long as the ego can withstand it, right? Self-deprecating. I'm just not as smart as I used to be. I'm not as quick, man. Any way you can lighten the conversation. You don't walk out on stage on a random, third Sunday in the year and make a sermon about it 5 years out. Right. You just drip it in conversations, but you're publicly acknowledging it. Okay.
Would you start in that regard with like key leaders and then broaden it out? Or is it just in general?
I would say personnel team, depending on your polity structure. Some churches have personnel teams. Some churches have boards and elders, whatever your polity structure is, whatever team within your polity structure the pastor would lean on to help facilitate this type of conversation. Okay. But at 5 years out, you're not having a new leader hire conversation. Remember, there's 6 conversations. 5 years out, what you're having is the protect organizational continuity conversation. 5 years out is a great time to do an organizational assessment. At Sherpa, we actually have 2. We call it an organic assessment. We look at like 7 different pillars. It's like an open kimono, really get up in your grill. But we also have a transition readiness assessment that's a little lighter, and it's specifically oriented towards preparing for transition. You could go either route at that 5-year mark. Gives you time. One of my clients, it's pretty funny. We were reading their bylaws, and it stated in their bylaws that the required text from the stage is the King James Version. The pastor who'd been associated with the church for over 50 years rarely used the King James Version, but at that time, within a year prior to this meeting, okay, we met whenever the year was. Within a year prior to that meeting, they had group leaders in their church saying that all other translations were infected by Satan.
Oh, okay.
Right. I mean, can you imagine?
But the pastor was using other translations.
But he was okay because he'd been there long enough. So he was, he he was fine, right? Most of his preaching, he was translating into English the Reina Lavera because he would just do that because he's brilliant. So, but it made no sense. But could you imagine if you're the successor and you have zero credibility the way Jeff did?
Right.
Your first Sunday, you preach out of the extra spiritual version, the ESV. Can you imagine the phone calls they're getting from those group leaders?
Sure. Yeah.
So what they did, because we identified this, we got ahead of it. They had time to, in a very intentional way, disconnected from a search process, they went and revamped their bylaws. And anytime and they made some other changes, but if you do the bylaw change in relationship to the search process, people are like,
why are we doing this?
Why are we doing this?
Yeah.
But if you do the bylaw, if you need to do it, doing it far enough in advance, disconnected, then it's just good stewardship.
Yeah.
Right.
I can't tell you how many new pastors have come into churches and like one of the first things they have to do is work through the bylaws because there's some random small thing in there that is,
that tripped them up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
that's huge. Yeah. So I'd say, man, open season 5 years out, the
Mhm.
closer you get, then you start dialing up other conversations. But that's for 4 of the 6 conversations. There's never a point in time where a pastor and key leaders should not have an emergency succession plan. Like that needs to be in place
for every pastor.
I would even say
every leader.
I would say even depending on the church context, there's most churches are solo lead pastors. I would even have it for key volunteers. Like high capacity volunteer people that have significant leadership authority and have passwords and have access to buildings and have responsibilities. If something happened there, that can be a really detrimental to a church.
Sure.
So there's never a point where that's not the case. And then I would also say there's never a point in time where a personnel committee or an elder board or a board of directors does not need to have a conversation about the long range planning portion of the compensation package. You should be having a conversation with your ministry leader about retirement. How are you funding retirement? If it's not part of the compensation package because you don't pay them a lot, how are you compensating that? That conversation there's never a point where that conversation isn't appropriate. So those 2, the emergency succession planning, proactive exit planning, we need to be engaged in those. And there's never a point.
And it really doesn't matter. That's not something that you wait till the last minute to do. That's something that you,
that's right.
Day one really of pastoral leadership should be having those conversations.
That's exactly right. And then once you get into, the organizational continuity conversation, 5 years out, starting to do some assessment work to label some of those deficiencies in the culture. One of my pastors is a pastor at First Baptist Church in Durant, Oklahoma. He's been retired for a while. James said, we were processing this and he goes, man, he said, really, I have the opportunity to stop being the senior pastor and become the interim pastor for the next few years. Yep. He changed hats and he took on the role of an interim pastor after he'd been there a few decades. He took on the role of an interim pastor and started engaging in conversations that only he could have. And instead of waiting to address issues, and then hiring an interim later, he did it right away.
And they ended up with an interim that they trust, that they know, and has all these years of relationship to help with the transitional stuff that he's got to do.
Right. Yeah. So I would say 5 years out, you're in the window to do some assessment work so you can label big rock cultural issues that can be addressed and you have time to address, disconnected from the search. I think once you get around the 2.5, 3 year mark, start to define rules of engagement. So are we going to do a stop and go process where theoretically 4th Sunday of the month, pastors here, 1st Sunday of the next month, new guys here? Rarely works that way, but you get it. There's no overlap. There's no connection between the two. Do we do an intentional interim? In some cases, we might do. I've have great stories of churches that started doing all the assessment work on the front end, and they just got to a point for whatever reason. Either, man, the Lord had the audacity to open a new opportunity for the outgoing guy, and it moved up his timeline. Health issues, or relational stuff. They get into navigating some of these big rock issues, and it uncovers a pretty big issue. And we need to bring in an intentional interim and to work through some stuff because the relational rift that it caused. All of those things, those are all real scenarios. So are we going to do the overlap? process path, stop and go. We're going to do an intentional interim. How are we going to manage those 5 essential signposts? What is all that? If we do an overlap, that's going to dictate when we start the search process versus stop and go, because that transition date is different.
Right.
So we got to understand all that stuff and lay it out and go into it eyes wide open. Once we have the transition plan in place, then we start this really formal, intentional public communication cycle. And then you get usually, depending on the process pathway and the overlap, somewhere around 1.5 years to a year out, you're starting to ramp up the search conversation. And then once the person starts, now from that point forward, another big mistake ministries make is they equate the start date with the end of the process. No, we need to architect an onboarding process that takes place. And I say for 12 months. I tell people, if you run into someone that talks about onboarding in a ministry context that lasts 90 days, they don't know what they're talking about. Like there's no way you can transfer influence in 90 days. And I don't care how big the church is. It's probably worse the smaller a church is. But it takes time to transfer influence, and onboarding is all about the architecture of influence transfer, not just responsibility transfer.
One of the things that I always tell our search teams in those times in the training and coaching process for them is that their process does not end when the pastor is voted in. That for another year, they're his cheerleaders, they're his go-to support. They're helping introduce him to.
So you're building that into your coaching.
Yeah.
Okay. So can I ask you a question?
Sure. Yeah.
One of the things that I run into is a lot of my teams because there are several cases where we're architecting multi-year processes at the board level. And then we get into the search process, and the search team is in effect for that search process. What is your best thinking on how to protect those lay leaders, either board members or search team members, from just process fatigue post-hire? I mean, the search process is really
intense.
It is intense, and it's a lot. And those people, man, they serve hard and they pray a lot. Have you seen that? I mean, how do you help them?
I've really tried to focus more on the relational component of it rather than a specific ongoing process. So they're not necessarily meeting together as a team.
As an accountability function for an onboarding.
Yeah, unless the pastor asked them to do that, and we've had 1 or 2 cases where that happened. But for the most part, it's much more along the lines of you are the people that he has met and gotten to know over the course of this process. Got it. And in those relationships, you represent the church. Now you've brought him here. The rest of the church has voted to have him here, but none of them know him the way that you do. None of them have spent the amount of time that you have. And so invite him to your homes, like be hospitable and relational with him. But also
it's a great idea. Seriously, for you guys listening, I cannot tell you what great advice that is. It's huge.
But also just make sure that on Sunday mornings, you can help bring people to him and introduce them and start conversations, and just be aware that you're bringing in a man and his family who don't know anybody else in this room. You're the only people who know him. So now help him get to know people.
So in 2010, October of 2010, 2 things happened. October, I got the Barna research, but when I commissioned them, I got that report back in October. In that month, I also left banking world and went into full-time vocational ministry for the first time as an executive pastor. Okay. My assistant, when we'd walk through the lobby, she would walk with me. And if she caught people's eye, saw them walking up, she would say, "This is so-and-so."
Yeah.
And she'd just whisper it to me so I would know their name.
Yeah.
And I cannot tell you
how valuable that is.
How valuable that simple thing was for me.
Yeah. So that's kind of been the biggest focus of that is relationally, how do you help him assimilate into the life of the church? Because there is a culture that's already here. He's not coming in and just overhauling that. He's got to learn how to lead in the context of the culture that's already there. And so the best way to do that is building relationships, and you're his frontline team to help with that.
It's so good. It's so good. Yeah, when we do onboarding, we look at 5 vectors, if you will.
Mhm.
I'd say 2 mistakes, and I want to see if you see this as well. So this isn't teaching. I'm asking. I see 2 mistakes. One is when the new guy comes in, the leaders around them behave as though they have all the influence they need to affect their job, like day one.
Mm-hmm.
So too much, they presume too much influence too quickly, or the opposite extreme, where leaders in the church, for whatever reason, they withhold influence, and it really becomes a battle to get them to let it go. I mean, there's a lot of reasons that people behave that way.
Yep.
Have you seen that in your context,
Yep.
both extremes?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, yes, there are so many, times where, whether it's not willing to give up power or whether it is wanting to maintain the influence that they felt during the transition time, or whether even if it's like sometimes you have people who, in key leadership positions who may have gone along with the calling of a new pastor, but didn't necessarily feel like they were 100% on board yet. And it takes that time to figure out whether they really like him or not.
And just wait and see.
Yeah.
Like I'm here, but
we'll just, you got to prove yourself, And so, yes, we've seen both extremes of that.
Yeah, that's huge. It's huge.
Well, as we kind of begin to wrap up today, I wanted to mention one thing that you're doing in terms of Sherpa, and that is SBCAL, which is the Southern Baptist Conference of Associational Leaders, is a ministry organization that I partner with through our association, and you are actually forming a partnership with SBCAL to help train AMSs in succession planning and helping our churches. And so there's some cohorts that are going to be coming up for that, and I'm actually planning on being a part of that. I'm looking forward to that.
That's awesome.
And so talk just a little bit about what the value is in helping train associational leaders across the country to help churches in this area of ministry.
Yeah, it's huge. The practical reality, there's no way that our team can do it.
Right.
Like it's just such an important topic. What I used to say in 2007, 8, 9, 10, when I was really starting to pay attention, this is like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a tsunami. It's like when a tsunami starts to crest off way out in the ocean, and you look out and it's like, it's only that big, right? It's not here yet. Well, in January of last year, the World Economic Forum released it. They do a report every 2 years. And I think it's page 6, right-hand column, about a third of the way down. If you download the report, it's either page 6 or 7, but it cites 2 demographic realities globally shaping world economies. The first one that they list is an aging workforce. The topic of an aging demographic moving away from their employment years, the tsunami is at the seashore. It is massive. I've been feeling that for a long time. And I mean, I have clients we work with ministries on 5 continents, and it is a global concern. It's a big deal. When you look at the reality of this conversation, and I would even say the significance of this conversation, I've known for years the only way that whatever the Lord put on my heart to share was going to be able to get out there was in partnership with associations, denominational leaders globally. And so we tried to do this back in 2019. And I don't know if you remember March of 2020, this thing called COVID.
Thing happened,
This weird thing called COVID hit. And so this is just the time to relaunch those efforts. And honestly, looking back, by the grace of God, there go we. I think now is probably a more optimal time. It's just such a felt need in the psyche. There's more permission to play in this conversation than there was even 5 years ago. And so to me, it makes sense to come alongside associational leaders. And I'll correct one thing you said.
Okay.
I'm not training you guys how to do succession. Okay. Like obviously there's a lot of wisdom and perspective. It's but earlier today, they didn't see us walking around talking, but you're talking about the trellis and the vine. It's a great analogy. Like the stuff that we do is we created a framework, we codified principles. And what we're doing is we're training AMSs in that framework. Okay. And so you can bring in your experiences nuance things, massage things, adapt things. It's not a, we're not telling you to do it a certain way. It's just giving, I find that a lot of AMSs and a lot of leaders, quite frankly, even local church pastors, their intuition is dead on. They just don't have hooks to hang their intuition on.
Right.
And so we're just giving categories of conversations to have and a methodology to, and there's wise ways to and appropriate ways to engage a conversation, and there are inappropriate ways. Like the right conversation at the wrong time can blow up a transition.
Right. Yeah.
It just can.
Yep.
And so that's really what it is. It's just resourcing you guys to help you locate and sharpen the tool a little bit.
To then apply it in our local context for our churches, our pastors.
100%.
Yeah.
And then partnership with the churches. And so by what does Paul say is your sphere increases, my sphere increases. I'm keenly aware that my fruit grows on other people's trees. So because you're participating in this, and who knows how many ministries you're going to help, by extension, when we're in heaven and we're, navigate, I'm going to meet some dude, 2 generations of leaderships down the road, assuming Jesus doesn't come back before then, that their ministry is thriving, their families are healthy, their churches are healthy because you and hundreds of other associational leaders helped the church avoid a train wreck of a poorly implemented transition.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's huge.
So if somebody wanted to find out more information about Sherpa, what's your website?
PlanningSuccession.com.
PlanningSuccession.com.
Yeah.
Awesome. That will be linked in the comments and also on the various links for the podcast. And as we close today, 2 more questions. Number 1, how can we pray for Sherpa as a ministry?
Oh man, it's a great question. I've been a solopreneur since I started this and really pushing. I mean, I joined Oxano for a little while. They hired me to do succession there, but most of my career pursuing this professionally, I've been by myself since 2019. And 2025, our team grew.
Wow.
And honestly, it's the first time in a long time I've been a team leader. And every guy on my team is so much more gifted than me. It's like it's a really weird thing, Jason, to know that I am the weakest link on the team. And that's not self-deprecation. JD, Chris, and Mike are amazing guys. And just stewarding the team. Yeah. We all have this deep sense of stewardship of what God's called us to do with Sherpa. And honestly, Jesus in John 17 prayed for our unity. I think the biggest thing for us as a team, if people would pray for us, is how can we as a team stay unified, stay loving each other, serving one another, and really working well. Because if we're as a team, we're healthy, man, we're going to help a lot of ministries and a lot of leaders. But if we get egos on our team, man, it can ruin a lot of stuff. I'd say it's the biggest thing. And
well, that's actually really encouraging to hear you talk about that, because some of the most unhealthy team contexts I've ever seen are when the lead guy has to be smarter than everybody else in the room.
Oh,
you
that's not our problem. That is not our problem. Yeah, I'm really good at what I do, but I can't even touch JD when it comes to the stuff that he does. Yeah. And the way Chris thinks about organizational assessments, and even one of the, we don't just do succession planning. Like there's a whole host suite of things. Chris, the way he builds automations and the things that he's doing with us at Sherpa, we're eventually going to start helping churches. And like, how can we use AI to say, like, he's working with a church right now. It's crazy. They do, their style is they do sermon-based group discussions. Mm-hmm. So what they would do is they'd have somebody, because the pastor is a good friend of mine, by the way, never gets his notes out ahead of time. Right. I mean, I'm sure all of the pastors in your association have been trained.
We all publish ours weeks ahead of time.
Yeah, weeks ahead of time. So they have somebody in the audience, one of the staff, taking notes feverishly, right? Mm-hmm. To fill in the blanks to Mike's sermon notes, to turn that in right after church into a study guide for the first group that meets that night, right? That's hours of work and multiple people touching it. Chris's ability just knows AI. He just finished his MBA. He in organizational stuff, he has this little side emphasis on AI was his keystone project. He was able to build an automation that took the transcript. They loaded up the theological profile of the church, trained the AI workflow on the culture of the church. You drop and gave some parameters, drop in the transcript, outspits a leader's guide, and group questions,
Wow.
collectively saving that team about 6 to 8 hours
Sure. Yeah.
of work when you look at all the people, and it happens in minutes. And like those types of things are, at the end of the day, Sherpa is about healthy and effective leaders, teams, and organizations. So in transition's a key part of helping leaders stay healthy and effective, right? But it's little things like this where, like Chris is moving the needle on Sherpa massive ways. And, I could brag on our team all day long. It's anyway.
Speaking of AI, one of the funniest things that's happened to me recently, I was preaching at a church, and somebody had one of those AI note takers. And so they just sitting in the audience, listened to my sermon. It took notes of it, and then it generated a quiz based on the sermon. And so they came up afterwards and asked me the questions to make sure I even knew what I was talking about. So that was, thankfully, I answered all of them correctly. So that was good. But
dude, it's crazy. There are AIs that can listen and actually grade how accurate you are real time.
Yeah.
Bro, it's scary.
It
hey, man, I'm telling you, maybe you should do a podcast on AI workflows and have Chris on it. Like, seriously, he's amazing.
Well, then last question, how can we pray for you and your family?
Huge. Oh, man. So in 2013, my mom moved in with us. She retired, and it was a big deal. Like her living with us, helping with the kids was the thing that allowed me mentally and emotionally just to step away from my family and travel. Like Allie and I counted the cost of me doing this for months before we jumped in. And a couple of years ago, we started seeing some stuff with my mom. And today we know it's a brain tumor and Alzheimer's. And in the last 6 months, it's really started to pick up. And it's dementia and Alzheimer's is an insidious disease. It's disgusting. Yeah. And I am very fortunate of my siblings that my mom lives with us, and I get to care for her. And my wife is amazing, but it's hard. It's hard. And I'm not the only guy going through this. A lot of people in America navigating, having to a loved one going through this. And, it's one of the big 10, man. Honor your mother and father. And it's hard, but I've probably not interacted with one of the 10 commandments as much as I've interacted with that passage, because it's so viscerally real. And what does it mean to honor my mom in this season? Yeah. And it's a blessing, but it's hard.
Sure.
So,
well, we will certainly be praying. What is her name?
Joella.
Yeah. We'll be praying for Joella. Yeah. Well, Will, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing with us all about succession planning and how what God is doing there is a ministry that can partner and should partner with our local churches. So we're very grateful for you coming in today and talking with us, and look forward to hearing more from you and seeing what God does as we kind of enter these cohorts coming up soon. So
it's going to be fun.
Thank you, brother. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for joining us for the Co-Mission Podcast. For more information on the featured guest plus previous episodes, you can visit our website at westmetrobaptist.com.